Hey, you're listening to Terms of Engagement. We hope that everyone had a great holiday break, and we're really excited to be back with you for season 2. This is our first episode of season 2. I'm Archon Fung, a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and director of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation.
And I'm Stephen Richer. I'm the former elected Maricopa County Recorder, and I'm now a senior fellow at the Ash Center. And for season 2, we're going to try something a little different, and it's something that we experimented with in season 1, and we thought it worked well. But each week, we're going to select either a book or a long form article, and we're going to bring in somebody who can discuss that piece, often the author, and say why it's especially relevant or how it bears on events that are unfolding today. And the fun part about this is we'll introduce you to a lot of this great literature, and we'll also introduce you to a lot of these great writers. And so if you have questions for the writers, this was an opportunity to pose those questions to the authors themselves, which isn't something that we always get to encounter. Additionally, if you have any ideas of stuff that we should be reading, and we're not talking just sort of like your 700-word newspaper article, but something a little longer, a little heftier, a little maybe even tapping into academic work a little bit, given that we're at a university, then please feel free to recommend that to us, and we'll give it a look.
Right. And so our hope is that this will be a little bit of a democracy book and article club in season 2, and we'll see how that works out. As always, we're speaking as individuals and not on behalf of Harvard University, the Kennedy School, or the Ash Center.
Yep. So just go ahead and put your comments in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring those and integrating them into our conversation today.
Great. So we are less than 2 weeks into 2026. I thought things were going to be mellowing out and getting quiet on the news and politics scene, and we'd be able to read and talk about academic articles. But they are definitely not slowing down. The United States military initiated the new year by invading Venezuela with U.S. Delta Force commandos, capturing, arresting, kidnapping, depending on your point of view, President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. That's one thing that happened. In mid-December of 2025, Congress's deadline for the administration to release all of the Epstein files came and went, with a very small percentage of those files being released, and we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead. And of course, Minneapolis resident Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE officer on January 7th. For those of you keeping count, her death was the first gun homicide event of the year in Minneapolis. Since then, one more person has been killed unrelated to ICE on January 8th. But so half of the deaths due to guns were Renee Good so far in Minneapolis. Just hours after the shooting, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said that Good's killing was justified because she was trying to run over an officer and that she was engaged in an act of domestic terrorism. President Trump posted on Truth Social that Renee Good, quote, violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer. On the other hand, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said that the DHS statement was bull ***, and penned a New York Times opinion piece titled, "Trump is Lying to You." Video analysis by the New York Times and the Washington Post concludes that the ICE officer shot once through the windshield and then twice through the driver's side window at point blank range, and refuted somewhat the administration's account. Now, these vastly different accounts of what happened in Minneapolis mirror the subject of today's discussion. Last week was also the 5th anniversary of the protests and the attacks on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. As with Good's death in Minnesota, there's dramatic disagreement about what happened. Was it an insurrection and a riot, or a justified, largely peaceful protest against a stolen election? If we could show the graphic, I captured a screenshot from the White House's webpage marking January 6th. And the White House says, with his triumphant return to the White House, President Trump wasted no time righting one of the darkest wrongs in modern American history. On Inauguration Day 2025, he issued sweeping pardons and commutations for the vast majority of January 6 defendants, who were patriotic citizens who had been viciously overcharged, denied due process, and held as political hostages by a vengeful regime. On today's show, we look back upon that day in a conversation with Mary Clare Jalonick, who has just released a great book, Storm at the Capitol, which is an oral history, hour by hour, almost minute by minute oral history of that day.
And so we'll now welcome in Mary Clare, who is a longtime reporter at the Associated Press. She is a graduate of Davidson College and previously was a reporter for Congressional Quarterly. And we're really excited to have her. She just published this book, 7 days ago, on the 5-year anniversary of January 6, 2021. And Archon and I both had the chance to read it this past week, and it was not necessarily an uplifting read, but a very meaningful read, and one that I think contributes significantly to the conversation that continues on. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
Great.
So Archon and I wanted to start with, why did you decide to write this book? Why did, a lot has been written in terms of reporting. A lot has been litigated in terms of documents. Obviously, over quite a few people have been prosecuted. And so this story has been told in other fashions. Why did you feel the need to write this book?
Well, 2 reasons mostly. I mean, I was there on January 6th in the Capitol. I cover Congress for the Associated Press, where I've worked for 20 years, and I've covered Congress for that entire time, off and on. And, last 12 years, I've been there every day. And so, I had been covering January 6th, and I had a lot of this, sort of, as we call it, in my notebook. I talked to a lot of people about their experiences that day when I covered the committee, and that the January 6th Select Committee that investigated it. And I talked to a lot of people, and whenever I was talking to anyone, either about January 6th or often not about January 6th, I would try to ask about their experiences. This is sort of the lawmakers that I was talking about. And I ended up writing a few different stories for the first anniversary, and I had a lot of good material, just, long form kind of quotes about how people felt, what they saw. And it seemed especially relevant, once we got a couple of years on, and it was obvious that there were a lot of people who were sort of trying to create a different narrative about what happened that sort of went counter to the facts. And, it seems to me that an oral history is a really good way to sort of present those facts without it being a narrative from someone that people might not trust, right? It's not my narrative. It's not any politician's narrative. And the idea is to be sort of definitive and nonpartisan, and kind of present a collective history. There's more than 150 voices in the book. And, while people have different perspectives and remember different details at times, there's really, there's not a lot of diversity in terms of the facts of what happened, which is that a large group of rioters, thousands of rioters, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds of rioters, thousands of people were at the Capitol, and broke into windows and doors and temporarily stopped the certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory. And I think, you'll see there are rioters included in the book. The voices are lawmakers, police, rioters themselves, workers, journalists, staff, and everyone kind of has the same general narrative, including the rioters, of what happened. Their motivations might be different and their feelings in the moment might be different, but there's not a lot of contradiction in terms of the basic facts of the day.
So can I pause you there? Because I haven't read maybe any books like this, which is not your narrative, not a paragraph by paragraph recitation of the events of that day, but is instead clips of quotes and recollections from an array of people involved in that day. Why did you decide to, because I'm sure you could have turned it into prose. You write several hundred words every single day, I'm sure. Why did you decide to leave it as their interviews, their quotes?
Yeah, I thought their quotes, standing on their own, were really powerful in a lot of ways. And there's also one thing that, so around half of the interviews are mine, like my personal interviews that I did with people. But a lot of the book is from court documents, from court testimony, like rioters in rioters' trials, either testifying in their own trials. A lot of police testified in those trials. There were a lot of people that I couldn't get to in those testimonies. Like, there were Secret Service testimony, things like that. And, there was just a lot of really good detail. There were, hundreds of pages in every trial that I looked into that, where you could use some of that testimony. So there were just so many powerful passages from a lot of people. And I think just letting that stand on its own is better than my trying to reconstruct a narrative, which would be, sort of inherently my narrative. So right. I really like oral histories. I've always liked them. And I think just it was an interesting way to get all of those people in there without, and just kind of letting that stand on its own.
Yeah. Some of the oral histories or interviews in sociology books that I read are really trying to get at how people have like deep views about a situation and how they're making meaning out of it. And your book, you choose to stay kind of at almost not quite, but largely at a just the facts, ma'am kind of level. It's like what happened at 2 p.m. on January 6th. And so how did you think about that trade-off as like telling people just what happened, just the facts and how they played out versus kind of interviewing people and asking, what does this say about American democracy? And, kind of getting deep on their perspectives on those kinds of questions.
Yeah. And I got a little bit into that at the end, but I think mostly it was, sort of letting people know exactly what happened in the building that day. Yeah. That was sort of the main. There's been all these investigations into, what happened at the White House, what was Trump doing, what was his motivations, what do you call this? Did he incite it? What, all of that. Mm-hmm. And I guess the idea is that people can sort of decide that themselves by looking at this set of facts. But yes, I mean, we definitely tried to, I think there were some cases even where my editor was like, no, this is too much, where I would sort of try to infuse some emotion of, in the narrative. That didn't happen in many cases, but there were a few cases where she, even said to me, I think we need to pare it back even more. And I agreed, just because the sort of narrative part of it is really supposed to just sort of get you and explain what's happening. And then I do think there's a lot of emotion and power in a lot of those quotes and sort of what people are feeling and thinking in the moment. Yeah. And, it was less about just sort of those overall themes, although some of that is in there, but a lot of it was sort of, what they were experiencing in that moment and what they might've been thinking.
Yeah. So getting to some of the particular passages, obviously it was a crazy day in so many ways, but you draw out how some people are really quite surprised as it's unfolding. And so on different sides of the spectrum, there is Jamie Raskin, who's thinking, oh, are we going to count the votes properly and allocate them? And his big worry is that Mike Pence is going to mess up the count process.
Right.
And so he says, I felt great relief when he realized that Pence was not going to mess up the process. And then he says, history plays tricks on everybody. I've been so worried about Vice President Mike Pence. And in fact, I should have been worried about the people who wanted to hang Mike Pence, which is like, wow. And then on the other side, Marjorie Taylor Greene during the day says, quote, we thought Antifa was breaking in or Black Lives Matter because those were the riots that had gone on all through 2020 in her mind, day in and day out, just horrible riots all over the country. And that was the only thing that made sense to most of us. And then somebody says, Marjorie, it's our people. It's not, Antifa. What are some of the other kind of surprising moments to the particular people that the world is not what they think it is, or the day is just not what they think it is?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, and Jamie Raskin has such a great way with words, but yeah, I mean, everyone was absolutely shocked. I think one of my sort of favorite quotes in the book is I interviewed Nancy Pelosi, and she said, it's a very simple quote. She said, we expected mischief in terms of process. We never expected violence. And I think that is very much where everybody's head was in that moment. I mean, I think people probably forget that we had no idea what Mike Pence was going to do. He was not giving any clues beforehand. We sort of now remember what he did, which was, decline to try and help Donald Trump overturn the election. But he was speaking at rallies in the day beforehand and talking, giving hints that he thought that the election might have been stolen. It was a total cliffhanger basically coming in. And he had decided, now we know through investigations that he had decided quite a bit before that he was not going to do that, but he didn't say it. And Trump was calling him and pressuring him as soon as that morning. So, we knew going in that there was going to be this sort of dramatic standoff, and it was possible that Pence was going to try something. So that kind of 1 o'clock moment when he released that letter saying that, that he did not believe this is what the founders intended, right at 1 o'clock, which is when the session started. So that was a question I asked a lot of lawmakers who were there. Were you surprised? Were you relieved? What was your feeling when you got that letter and found out that Pence wouldn't do it? And that was what I asked Raskin when he said that. So yeah, there really was just like, I think there's also just this sense that something like that could never happen. I mean, no one ever envisioned that, including the police, which led to a lot of security failures that day. But, it just was and, have talked to some people since, who were maybe out in the States or who were, Trump supporters or whatever, who might say, how could you guys not know? People were really mad, and I thought that was interesting. But certainly in our bubble, I mean, that was just not, the imagination didn't really go there. I mean, I think people thought that there would be a lot of people outside and that it could get violent outside, but not that
nobody, not the reporters, not the staff, not the police, not the members.
Nobody. Yeah. I mean, maybe somebody, but not many. Yeah.
That tees up a lot of important questions, including, I think, why did you not know? Because a lot of the allegations after the fact were that this was mismanaged by Capitol Police, Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump, whomever. But before we jump to that, Mike Pence happens to be someone I hold in very high regard. But assessing that, do you think that if he had declared where he was going 3 days before January 6th, that the events of January 6th would have looked differently?
That's so interesting. I haven't thought about that. Maybe. I mean, I think that he would have come under a lot of fire, obviously, criticism, if he had done that. But yeah, maybe I'm not sure. I mean, right. I mean, it really was it was obviously some groups were planning on this. But in some ways it was spontaneous by others, that sort of mob mentality that kind of came together. And I don't know. Yeah. I don't think we can know that. Right. I mean, there were so many factors that went into it.
It might have been worse, right? Or do you think it would have been better,
Maybe,
Steve? What's your intuition?
I mean,
but part of the day was intended to be the gathering at the Ellipse, in which the president assembled many thousands of his supporters, was meant to be inducive to Mike Pence, that he needs to do this, and that his people, our people, the people that voted for the ticket, which included him, wanted to see this happen. And so I don't know if it would have been less exciting, if it would have been a foregone conclusion, or if that would have said, hey, we know what the stakes are now. The stakes are, if we don't act, then Pence isn't going to do this on his own, and we're going to have a presidency that we find repulsive. So I don't know, but that was just something. I looking back on it, haven't reflected much on the last minuteness of the letter that he wrote.
Yeah.
It was very telling to me when he's in the car with his legal counsel, Greg Jacob, and they're still putting that together as they're driving to the Capitol. And so that was very striking to me. I want to remind our viewers that if you put your question in the comment, I'm always reviewing the comments, and so feel free to chime in here. But so turning to that other thing that I mentioned, did somebody fail on January 6th? I mean, the day didn't go how it should have happened. And I guess I would have operated under the presumption that, like, you can't get in the Capitol. You got to be crazy. That's got to be like one of the most guarded places in the universe.
Nobody has for 100 years, right?
Right.
the result of a failure or just a lack of imagination?
I think both. I think, yeah, I mean, I think, the top security officials were not taking seriously the threat. And part of that was because of a lack of intelligence, a good intelligence, which wasn't hard. I mean, the people were planning it openly online. So that the intelligence failure was particularly bad. And, that's something they've spent the last 5 years trying to improve. They really have sort of, reformed the intelligence operations and everything else in Capitol Police in the last 5 years. But yeah, sure. I mean, yes, it was definitely a failure of a lot of people, and certainly the security failure in terms of, the police were not getting good instructions about what to do. It was almost just, a lot of, is in the book, the radio was just total chaos. There really weren't many directions being given by the higher ups. So officers were just running around and trying to figure out where they could be most helpful, just, visually, basically. MPD, DC police were there as well. They really saved the day in a lot of ways. But, it was too bad, because I think there was a lot of demonization of the individual Capitol Police officers immediately afterward. I mean, I know personally, I felt right afterward, I was so frustrated that had happened. But I think now with time, we sort of realized they didn't have the direction or the resources, or, they were fighting so hard, and so many of them were injured. And they really are the victims here in a lot of ways. And so,
is there a single point of failure? Is there a person who failed on this day?
I don't think there is. No, that would be my, that's what I would say. I mean, just from the investigations, I mean, I think there were so many multiple failures. They weren't enough people there. There wasn't good intelligence. The equipment they had was not great. There were shields that were breaking on impact. There were, they weren't trained for this kind of thing. There's so many different ways that there were failures. I don't think you can blame one person for sure on any of it. And it isn't, there's a lot of people try to point it on Pelosi. That's obviously one of the sort of Republican talking points, is Pelosi's fault. I mean, what always gets lost there is that Mitch McConnell was the leader of the Senate. He had equal supervision as Pelosi, and they hire and fire the sergeants at arms. So that's sort of where that comes in, because the sergeants at arms who were making those decisions in the days before do work for them. But Pelosi said she didn't have any input in the decision not to bring in the National Guard beforehand. But as soon as the fighting began and they were asking, that the chief of police, Stephen Sund, was begging, I mean, all day, just absolutely begging for National Guard. Pelosi authorized it. McConnell authorized it. There were later sort of inexplicable delays at the Pentagon. And I think that's something that all sides agree on, that happened. So, there were so many different facets to this. It's not something that can be explained away with one talking point, which is something.
Is the Pentagon delay just kind of bureaucratic? It takes, they have to ask 5 people down the line and so on. And
yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of investigation into that and exactly what happened. I think it was somewhat chaos, but it's unclear if there were any reasons for the delay or if anyone was specifically delaying it. That is, I think, still unclear, and has been a subject of both the Democratic and the Republican investigations.
Yeah.
So
go ahead, Archon. Yeah. I want to get up to today, because eventually,
yeah. Right. I'm kind of going back to so I mean, we've all watched videos of the day and read a lot about it, but I think one thing reading your book, especially the account in the mid-afternoon, is I just don't think I appreciated the sheer violence of what was happening, right? So the interview accounts, or the oral history, I'm an action film fan, it reads like a scene from the 300, right? With the account of the Battle of Thermopylae, when there's 300 Spartans defending against these thousands of Persians. And so one detective says, quote, "The hallway is approximately 10 feet wide. Officers shoulder to shoulder lined up by rows. And then the demonstrators are also lining up by rows, trying to push in, and they're trying to push back. And then a Metro PD officer at the, in the same part of the hallway reporting on that says they were extremely physical. I don't think anyone was talking at that point. It was just physical, people hitting each other, punching, people with poles and metal poles. And I mean, that was just amazing to me. And I guess just by way of opening this part of the discussion, so these are a bunch of people who have a lot of experience policing many, many, many protests, some of which inevitably get out of hand. So does this feel like, in all of your conversations with them, like fundamentally different and more violent? And why is it different from the many, many other protests that these people are professionals in controlling?
Yeah, it's so different. It's like this hand-to-hand combat, this huge crowd, right? And talking about action movies, one of the other officers says in the book, I looked out and it looked like a scene from the Lord of the Rings, one of those huge battles in the Lord of the Rings. We had to go back and forth a little bit because he named this specific battle, and I was like, I'm not sure I don't know which battle it is, but you all might know. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, that really made sense to me because it does look like that. And right, they weren't trained really for this hand-to-hand combat. They might be trained for scuffles and, sort of think about in the streets like that summer before, some of the stuff that was going on. But not this sort of, it really does. And you say it reads like an action movie that just unfold. I didn't try to make it read like an action movie. I didn't manipulate it in any way, but it just sort of reads like that because it was so dramatic. And to me, that sort of part of the day was kind of the climax of the book and this, because it really was this sort of epic battle in this really iconic place, which is the tunnel on the front of the Capitol, in the middle of the west front of the Capitol, facing the mall. And it's where the president walks out onto the inaugural stage. So right behind the tunnel, where everyone was kind of trying to push in, is the inaugural stage. So if you think about, where any president who's being inaugurated outside is standing, that's where this crowd was. And it was just so wild. I mean, Joe Biden was supposed to be walking out that door 2 weeks later, and he did. But the fact that all of this violence and, happened right there is just, it's really like hard to think. And this one officer, Daniel Hodges, was, crushed in the doors. And those are sort of the big golden doors on the very front of the Capitol. So, and lastly, I'll just say, like, it's interesting that you say you didn't appreciate the violence, because that's been a surprise to me after the book has come out, how many people have said that to me. People who obviously, like you all, who are super plugged in and watch the news all the time and understand. I've had, a fellow reporter in the Capitol who wasn't there at the time, who wasn't there yet, said that to me the other day. So, I think a lot of people don't realize how violent it was. And some of that is because we don't talk about it that much. It's sort of a controversial subject right now.
Yeah. After reading, I understand the PTSD and the number of suicides that followed a lot more clearly. I mean,
Is it 4 or 5?
There were 4 officers who died by suicide afterward. 2 of them were like the next summer. So, I obviously don't know, exactly, but the MPD did announce that these 2 officers had died by suicide and that they had been there. So, that's all we know. But one of them was the day after, and another one was in the week after. Yeah. So, which is just like so awful and tragic that happened. It just, it's just hard to read and to write about.
So the battle reference was probably Helm's Deep, when everyone's sort of
I think
mashed
it was
together.
I think that's right. I was worried people wouldn't know.
As Sean sort of referencing in the comments, weren't there 2 January 6s? There was the January 6th where a police officer is getting hit over the head with a pole. But then there's the January 6th where, as you noted in your book, one rioter even felt a little bit sheepish about asking somebody, "Where's the bathroom in here?"
Crazy. Yeah.
Right.
So is it possible that somebody participated in that day, in that riot, and just had a completely different experience from some of the ones that were being shown on television?
For sure. I mean, I think that's something that I learned in this and sort of came to understand, is there's a a real diversity of motivations of the rioters. There were the extremist groups who had weapons stockpiled in Virginia and, ready for a civil war, and were sort of, tactically trying to get into the building, knew where the entrances were, that kind of thing. And then there were people who just kind of came along for the ride, either because they were angry and had been riled up, or just because they just wanted to see what was going to happen. I don't know how many, I can't tell you how many of each, but I think the rioter you're referencing is an interview I did with Jason Riddle, who is he actually tried to reject his pardon earlier this year. And that's something that you can actually do. But he said, he told his story and just said, it was a party. It was like a party to me. It was like euphoria I felt inside there. He was in the Senate parliamentarian's office, which was being ransacked. He took a bottle of wine and just started drinking it. And he also took a book called Senate Procedure out of the parliamentarian's office and sold it to someone when he first got out of the building after that. And the person told him they'd just seen someone carried out of the building who had been shot. And I assume that was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot when she was trying to get into the house with members still inside. And he said, no, it's like a party in there. And they said, no, I saw this. And he said he was never the same again, because he realized he could be in a whole lot of trouble for what he was doing. So he just ran. And I thought that was like a really interesting, there were just a lot of different types of people there. And it was just sort of that mob mentality that they all kind of came into one.
Is that dichotomy the basis of the dispute today? Because if you go online, there will be plenty of people, and I wrote an article about the sort of the commemoration of January 6th, and you'll see plenty of people who say, no big deal. Just not that violent. Lots of different theories about what provoked it, but also just sort of a sense that in fact, Eric Erickson, a popular radio show host, basically said, we can't expect Americans to think about school shootings for more than one day. Why are we surprised that not that many people care about January 6th 5 years from now? Now, I don't know if that's an accurate characterization, but it is a characterization of what some people feel, at least, about this day. Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know why exactly that is. But I do think that's probably the stories that you hear from some, you're not hearing as much from people who do want to downplay it about the violence and the injuries to the officers. You're hearing more about, sort of the innocent people who walked through. There's a quote that I have in a section in the back of the book, not back, but near the end of the book, where, I sort of list some of what people are saying today, some of the people who are downplaying it. And there was a tweet or a post on X a year ago on January 6, 2025, from a congressman named Mike Collins, who just sort of laid out this narrative that, hundreds of peaceful grandmothers came into the Capitol and walked around on an albeit unauthorized visit. And that is a narrative that I think some, people believe. And as you mentioned in the beginning, this White House website, I actually thought was pretty interesting, because it actually laid out, I don't always understand everything that people are saying or how it connects, but I guess that's what the narrative is from beginning to end. They sort of lay out the entire day in their narrative. And the narrative that they have is that, people peacefully walked there and then got attacked by the police officers, which I think you can see in my book, and certainly through all those videos that, evidence that contradicts that. But, I do think we can believe, a lot of people believe what they want to believe. And, we don't see those videos of the violence every day on television or anywhere. There's a lot of other stuff going on, right? As you said, we forget about, things within a day sometimes. So yeah, I think that a lot of people just sort of believe what they want to believe a lot of times in politics right now on every subject.
Yeah.
I guess I would just follow up with that is, the academic world has maybe reconsidered how it does history. And one of the questions was, why did you choose to do it in an oral history manner? Do you give any credence to the idea that there are multiple truths about this day, or that we can tell a definitive history?
I mean, I think there's a set of facts of what happened that you can't change, right? Like, I mean, there was violence. The police officers were attacked. There were, they stopped the count, the electoral count. The election was not stolen. It was certified by 50 states, bipartisan officials. There were dozens of lawsuits that were either rejected or dismissed. William Barr was Trump's attorney general. He, said there was not enough evidence of fraud. Those are things that are true, right? But when you're talking about people's individual experiences, sure. And I think that's a lot of the reason for something like this is it's not just for one side to understand what happened. It's for all sides to understand what happened and see that nuance and see that there were different types of people there and different experiences and that they were human beings inside and outside the building and all parts of it. So I think people's individual truths, sure. I mean, I do think there were so many different motivations and types of people there.
Yeah. So was there is there a world in which the members could have come out with more solidarity and agreement about what that day was about and how to respond to it? Because in the moment, there are these passages where there's a lot of solidarity between Republicans and Democrats in Congress. And in particular, when they all band together and say, we got to save the boxes of the electoral votes so that we can count them later. And then when they all stay and say, no, we've got to finish the process that day. It's super important. And they all do that.
Right.
And then they're also just intertwined with these kind of moments of division when Jim Jordan, who is one of Trump's strongest allies on Congress, says to Liz, he's trying to help, right? He says to Liz Cheney, let's get the ladies out of here. And Liz Cheney says, get the F away from me. You did this, right? And so there are definitely moments of antipathy as well. Could they have kind of come out of it agreeing like it was really bad that people invaded the Capitol and we need some more solidarity going out of this? Or no, that was never in the cards.
It is complicated, right? Yes, there's still divisions. It created even worse divisions. But at the same time, if you ask, and I think you see this throughout the book, I was certainly pleasantly surprised that there were a lot of Republicans who did want to talk to me. I think if you go up in the hallways to a lot of Republicans still today, they're going to talk about how bad it was. They might not blame Trump explicitly. Some of them might. I mean, I think you still see some of that that complicated reality, even in the last week in the Senate. You see this plaque that has been created. It was in 2022. It was supposed to be put up on the West Front to honor the police officers for their fighting. But the Republican House has not done so and has been pressured about it for the last few years. And finally, last week, Speaker Johnson said, well, it's not really implementable because of the names on, too many names and all this. And so the Senate actually last week passed with no objections, voice voted. So if one Republican had objected, they couldn't have done this, and they did. No one objected, and the Senate passed a resolution saying that they're going to put it up somewhere in the Senate. So you do still see there is still some agreement on it, and even Trump's staunchest defenders didn't object to that. So it is a complicated reality, and sometimes it just depends on the day, honestly. I think one of my favorite quotes in the book is by a CNN reporter, Manu Raju, and he talks about how we're still figuring out a lot of the details of the day and still trying to understand it. And I really think that that's true. I think we're still reckoning with it, and lawmakers are certainly still reckoning with it, which means, the American public is still trying to figure out exactly what happened in a lot of ways.
Yeah. How did it make you feel, Archon?
I mean, it made me appreciate the day in a different way. And then especially on the heels of the Minneapolis shooting, it makes me think, I don't know. I mean, despite your best efforts and the clarity and the careful, thousands of hours of research, I just don't see how we're going to come to a shared account of what happened 5 years ago in the Capitol or what happened last week in Minneapolis. I don't know. I mean, maybe just more time has to pass, but that's how it left me feeling. I mean, here's like your book, which lays out in, exquisite detail what happened, almost minute by minute. And we're just not going to agree, not for a while. I mean,
Yeah,
Stephen, what do you think?
I mean, that's got to be alarming to you, Mary Claire, that like even for something as televised and documented as this was. I mean, in Minnesota, you had a few body cams. This, you had like thousands of people, many of whom were reporters, lots of TV cameras, and yet, like, the truth is not 100% on the internet. I'll just say that much. So like, does writing this and seeing some of the responses make you sort of, does it exasperate you as a journalist and say like, what is the reason of this whole endeavor if we can't agree on facts anymore?
And did you think about like new angles to try to create more agreement, right? Or
I mean, I think, two things, like as a congressional reporter, we're kind of used to that. That's something that happens a lot. It's not just this. But, I guess one of my colleagues says sometimes, we just write through it, right? Like we just sort of, it's kind of hard, but it's also easy in what we do, especially AP, we're very much down the line, just sort of get the facts out there and write the truth. And, that's what I can do in my role, right? Different people have different roles, but that's sort of how I feel that I can help, which is just sort of get the truth out there. And that's not always an easy truth for everyone, right? Like the truth isn't always like going to make one side or the other happy. But I think that just like laying out on paper what we know and what other people say we know, not just based on what I think I know, that's what I can do to try to help with that. But yeah, you're never going to like solve that problem. I mean, we're in such a partisan moment. It's not just this subject. I mean, it's, we're covering a million things every day on the Hill, and all of them have some sort of sharp partisan disagreement. So, well, not all of them. Every once in a while, there's something that everyone will agree on. And that's always kind of fun to cover when everybody can come together. I really like when we can see bipartisanship, but
the book is only about 300 pages, and it reads quickly because it's not just blocks of a text, and it's little captures of each individual stories, weaving them all together. But I will say I put it down a lot because I was angry. I was angry that this is something that we're disputing. I was angry that this wasn't universally acknowledged as a wrong. I'm a romantic about American democracy, and so I sort of see this as our sacred citadel. And for me, this was never analogous with some of the riots that happened vis-a-vis BLM over that year, because Apple stores just don't hold the same cachet as the United States Capitol does to me. And so I just got so enraged. And then I got a little depressed even, because I would go online and I obviously saw the president's built out website for this, which was very incongruent with how I understood the day and these individuals. And I don't know that we're going to be in a better place 20 years from now. And I don't know how American students growing up will have the same sort of like historical experience that I did, where you had the American history textbook and that was history. Now, part of me sort of revisited whether I should have felt that way when I was in 8th grade, and a lot of people dispute that. But I just increasingly worry that we will no longer be a society that will produce a largely universal historical textbook. And so I had a hard time reading this book. But really again, no discredit to your work on it.
No,
and
I understand. That's really interesting. Yeah,
it's
interesting to hear what people think when they read it.
We're about out of time, but I just wanted to also express another reaction that I had, was kind of gratitude for giving voice, especially to the police officers, the detective, Metro PD, the people who don't have, I mean, reporters have a voice, members of Congress and senators obviously have a platform to articulate their experiences and express them. But the, people cleaning up the Capitol and the staff and the law enforcement folks seldom do have that voice. And so your book really I was grateful that I was able to hear from them about that
Yeah.
day. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for that.
Tried to get as much as I could. So
Well, Mary Clare, thank you so much for writing this book. It's published by Public Affairs. It was released on January 6th, just a few days ago. It's available on Amazon. I got the hardback copy because I'm trying to use my phone less, and so I'm trying to get off screen. But there is, of course, the Kindle copy is available, as is the audiobook copy. And so please check it out if you are interested in sort of a story-by-story narrative of this day. Thanks to everyone who joined us. If you have any recommendations as far as what we should be reading for next week, we will also try to send out as far in advance what we're reading so that you can maybe take a peek at it too and join us for that. And then Archon, you wanna send us home?
Yeah, great. So we will be back same time next week, Tuesday, with the live stream. Meanwhile, you can find a recording of today's show on the Ash Center's YouTube channel. And tomorrow, audio versions will be available on Google, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And special thanks to our production team, who is Colette, Courtney, Dana, and Evelyn.
Thanks all.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Take care.